Hello, and welcome to our review of the Series 12 finale, The Timeless Children. I'm a little bit under the weather in some way, so I might not be as fiery as I usually am, but I'm sure Adam will be able to make up for that with all his energy.
Woo!
But before we go into that, patreon.com/GenesisVandrazani. Exclusive access, early access, and requesting. Twitter.com/Giandrazani is social media for talking about stuff, basically. Didn't want to muck around with that. Don't want to waste my breath too much today. Adam.
Yes.
So, we've avoided talking about it for probably over a month now. It's been a long time.
Thereabouts, for sure. Since it aired, we haven't discussed it at all.
Yep. I have absolutely no idea what you think of this episode. I know the audience knows what I think because I've been on Lord's Last Panel Discussion and I've talked about it on Twitter at points. But we have absolutely no idea what you think of it. You could love it, you could hate it, you could be mixed, you could be in the middle. We have no idea. It's all a mystery, so it's time to unveil the curtain. What did you think of The Timeless Children?
It's a bit deflating, isn't it? I didn't hate it, and what I disliked about it is probably not what a lot of people would assume from me. I just found the episode... There were moments of it I was really intrigued and interested by, but a lot of it didn't feel active or energized. It felt quite lethargic despite it being so grand, and so I sort of struggled to sink my teeth into it. However, there were certain ideas and elements in it that I didn't actually mind. So overall, I think it's an ambitious episode, but not one that really clicked with me.
That sounds quite disappointing considering it's quite an important one.
Yeah.
Like considering how it was basically marketed as, everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
And to come out of it feeling indifferent isn't exactly ideal, is it?
No, it didn't get a rise out of me in any particular means. Not because of what was done, but because of how it was shown. With one big exception, which we sort of hinted at last week. Or last episode.
Yeah. So... this is a weird one. This is a really bizarre episode. I can't really... Even now, I've spent so much time since the day I watched it. It's been ages since the day I watched it. How long has it been? How many weeks ago was it that it aired?
Almost 5, I think. So just over a month, I think.
It's been over a month, and I still don't really know how I feel about it. It's interesting because I remember after we watched Fugitive of the Jadoon, we said that a lot of it, whilst it was very exciting to watch, a lot of it depended on where the story would end up. And I feel like this didn't really give the closure I wanted. It felt to me this felt like it felt less of a cap on the series and more just an opening of other ideas. So it's almost like it's just asking more questions rather than, I don't know. It's very strange.
It didn't feel for me at least. It didn't feel so much as a finale as just another... It felt like another Fugitive of the Jadoon, but without the kind of fun and excitement that makes Fugitive of the Jadoon work so well.
Well, here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, right? I don't mind the idea of doing stories that span across multiple seasons. I mean, look at A Song of Ice and Fire and how he wrote his books and how that was adapted into the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. A lot of the stories span across multiple seasons. That's absolutely fine. But the problem I have with this isn't necessarily the fact that it's doing a story that has the potential to be span across multiple seasons. The problem I have with it is that what it reveals and what the questions that it asks doesn't really do that much to benefit as a self-contained story. And that's, I think,
Absolutely.
the biggest problem.
Because the thing is, the structure of most of this episode is the Master delivering exposition to the Doctor. Granted, it is big exposition, but there's no real excitement around that beyond the sort of whack Cybermaster things. And it doesn't feel like an engaging episode. It just sort of feels like, here's a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't know about. Let's expand the universe without the episode actually doing anything beyond the Doctor discovering something, which, she kind of already thought might be the case anyway from Fugitive, having met the Ruth Doctor.
Yeah. And like you, I don't dislike the episode or hate or anything. I don't think I personally don't consider it to be overly bad or anything. I don't really feel that way about it at all. Like, you know, there's a lot of people going out there saying this is like another Hell Bent and all that, and I'm like,
no.
Ugh. Because, well, the difference is, like, Hell Bent, you know, obviously it tramples on a lot of things, and it tries to do a story and fails, and with this, I just feel like it sort of doesn't really do that much at all. It just sort of, it's a bit, it's weird. It's, you know, it's got that whole Chibnall thing of being quite vapid, but at the same time has a story as well. It's very strange because, you know, with the Series 11 finale, why we didn't like that was because it was completely vapid. It had no story. It was just
quite empty, yeah.
Yeah, it was an empty straw man of an episode, and it really achieved absolutely nothing. Whereas with this, it feels like that, except there's something interesting pasted on top of it. So it is, by technicality, it is more interesting, but the self-contained story under it is no different. It's still kind of just this generic Cyberman story that doesn't really go anywhere, and yeah.
Yeah, it just... Okay, I suppose, why don't we break it down? So should we start with the characters?
Sure, you need to go first because I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed. So you start with the Doctor. You start with the Doctor.
Yep. So the Doctor, my issue with her in this episode is that she's just sort of there as an audience surrogate in a way. She's anxious to know the truth, and she's, you know, she argues with the Master. Then she's caged up for the whole second act of the story, and she's just learning information. And then she escapes at the end. And there's no... I mean... Yes, it's sort of a challenge for her to discover that there's a whole history of herself that she didn't know.
You just cut off.
Oop. Sorry. I'll say that again. There's a whole history of herself that she didn't know. And yes, that's sort of alarming to her. But I don't see how that really challenges or changes who she is in this incarnation. It doesn't push her boundaries. It doesn't push her in any given direction beyond what we'd already seen this season. It felt just more sort of, she was just there as the audience surrogate to learn the information as we did, and she didn't really get much to do beyond that other than get inspired by the Ruth Doctor and do the mind thing and then escape. And it just didn't feel... Character-wise, it felt quite flat, given how this arc had been building to discovering this big dark secret, and once she learns it, it doesn't really push her somewhere. You know? It just didn't quite... I didn't feel anything for her character in this, because of the way the information was delivered. Had it been more confronting in some way when she was in the Matrix, then I probably would have enjoyed this a lot more. But
well, you see, this comes down to a big problem that Chibnall's having of trying to do something really bold, but then almost going back on it and trying to not make it as damaging as it sounds. It's like he's almost half-baking this idea a bit, and just because he doesn't want to completely break the law, he only wants to change it a little bit. But that doesn't really serve the story as a self-contained plot, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And in extension of what you're saying, and building on what I was just saying before, this doesn't progress the Doctor in any way. because from the Doctor's viewpoint, she still only really remembers Hartnell. She escaped from the Time Lords because she did not like what they were doing. And that's it. That's our Doctor. It doesn't, despite the fact that she had this whole thing before her, it doesn't really change who she is beyond just a whole bunch of unexplored canon and lore pre our version of the Doctor, you know? It doesn't... It just sort of feels quite passive for such a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't really have much more else to say about the Doctor, so who's next on the list?
Well, before we move on, I just wanted to say it's really irritating to me because I actually quite like Jodie's performance in this episode. It's just the characterization is the problem.
Absolutely. There's no fault with Jodie's... There's no fault with anyone's performances in this. It's purely just that I couldn't get into her performance because I just sort of felt passive about it because of the story and how it was told.
Yeah. So I suppose whilst we're still on the Doctor, we might as well dig right into the Timeless Child, considering they are the same character technically.
Yeah.
I'll briefly start with this. I won't say too much. I won't say too much because I'm a little bit exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
But see, it's very odd to talk about because the way it was presented through the Matrix, it reminded me a bit of like when you get those like informative documentaries. It was very much a VR slideshow, and like. I'm interested in the lore, very interested. I thought, like, you know, like we're thinking, you know, we go like, oh, we get a story in the past, prehistoric Gallifrey. You know, this is kind of like those stories that Terrence Dicks would seed into his stories, but we got a visual version of it, which is like, wow, that's really cool.
For sure.
But it sort of, like, I do find the lore interesting going forward, but then. What kind of undercuts it, though, is the fact that all of that stuff we just learned about the Timeless Child and Brandon, and the twist that the Brandon scenes were a mask for what the truth was, and I thought that was really neat. And that was all fine, and I liked the whole thing on Time Lord Science and Tech-Tayun, and the suggestion that Tech-Tayun might be Rassilon or the other, or one of those people.
I think Tech-Tayun is the other. I have
Possibly,
a specific moment. I have a specific moment I'll talk about when we get into Tech-Tayun.
But like, there's that whole thing of like we see the three Time Lords, and it's pretty much, it's mirroring the whole theory of Rassilon, Omega, and the other, and that was interesting.
Well,
it was quite interesting to like. It was like I was reading like a Doctor Who extended novel, and I was like, okay, this is quite cool. But then the problem is that when all that gets revealed, at the end, like the end of where it gets revealed. It then doesn't, like, I don't know if this was intentional from Chibnall or not, but there's that whole conversation with the Ruth Doctor, and it's like, it's almost like none of that really actually matters. Like, the way the script was trying to talk about it, it was like, oh, yes, that past you didn't know about and they lied to you, but you're still you, and it just felt like almost Chibnall was a little bit going back on what he was doing. It was very strange, because I know why he did it, because he wanted to find a way to get the Doctor out of the Matrix, inspire her by realizing that she's still the person that she's been, which then doesn't ruin Hartnell's character arc, which that's good for continuity, but in terms of here and now, this story, right now, as we are watching it, it doesn't benefit that. It only benefits repairing potential damage you're doing. And I feel like Chibnall is missing a step where he may be, trying to piece together lore that makes sense within the continuity of the show and do it in a way that's going to open up some new avenues. I can see that, and I think that, for me personally, is a positive, but what he's doing, unfortunately, is he's missing out on doing something really special with his actual finale story he's got here and now, that he's writing, that he has to cap off here and benefit the Doctor now. That's where I find this a bit lackluster.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in full agreement, because, I said I'll talk about it later, but I may as well bring it up now. Like, I think Tic-Taeun is the other, because I think the implication was those other two Gallifreyans that she went up to were Rassilon and Omega, and it was the three of them, because she discovered regeneration, and then obviously, Omega and Rassilon did their part, and it was basically sort of slightly reworking the Cartmel master plan, whereas, essentially saying it's not the Doctor who's the other, but her adopted mother, which, could potentially be interesting. My only real gripe with this big lore-changing thing is that it sort of gives the Doctor a bit of a Chosen One vibe, and I don't, as you probably gathered, I don't like those stories. I like when someone comes from their own background and makes their way to being the hero because of their own choices,
and it's weird because with the sort of the approach that Chibnall's taking with him revealing this but then going back on it, it's almost like he wants to have both. He wants to have his cake and eat it too, where he wants the Doctor to be a chosen one, but then also be what you state after that with Hartnell, and it's ballsy. But again, like the problem is that it doesn't really benefit the story at hand. That's the problem.
No.
I wish it actually had an effect on the actual story we're watching, rather than the past, the future, the lore, the overall perspective.
Because maybe what could have happened is the Master could have potentially resurrected Tic-Taeun, and, then Tic-Taeun herself becomes a villain because she was a mad scientist who experimented on her own adopted child. That's evil. And they could have, pushed that or done something where the whole Timeless Child's story ties in to the current conundrum beyond just Cyber Time Lords. As fun as a concept as that is, it just doesn't have that same oomph. It doesn't feel connected. It feels quite disjointed, as you were saying.
Yeah, well, we'll get onto that later.
So and also in terms of talking about the character of the Timeless Child, there isn't one, because we don't get to know what they're like throughout all their regenerations, really, beyond the fact that they fell off a cliff and died, and they came from somewhere else.
Yeah,
that we don't know.
and I saw something online. I think I did actually think about this a little bit first, but I didn't really piece it all together. It was just a bunch of thoughts I had, and then I saw someone online say the same thing that I was thinking and piece it together, and they thought, well, wouldn't it have been much better? Someone said, well, what if in a different scenario the Timeless Child wasn't the Doctor, but the Timeless Child was Kashamas, and then for it give Kashamas a reason to self-sacrifice because he's the one that is the Timeless Child. He's the one that's been affected by this. And that would have a whole host of its own problems. Firstly, like, why was Kashamas never there, like, during the Time War, whatever, blah blah blah, and also the fact that Chris Chibnall didn't really develop Kashamas' character at all, which is another problem. But I saw that and I thought, there is something to that. There's the fact that there was a way to do this where you could have had it have a direct impact on the story at hand beyond just the Master doing what he always does, if that makes sense. It would have been better if it was actually a unique circumstance. Because, you could point and say, well, the Master did this and it affects the climax of the story, and it does, but it's no different to any other Master story where the same thing happens.
Yeah, it ended up feeling like a budget version of The Doctor Falls, except The Doctor Falls has this resolution for the Master. The kind of resolution that the Master got in The Doctor Falls, we should have got something like that for the Doctor in this story because of how big of a deal this should feel. But it, at least for me, didn't feel like anything. And I don't mind the idea of there being more behind Gallifreyan lore. I eat that stuff up. I love it. As I said, my only quibble is the Doctor being a chosen one, but that's just a personal preference thing. I don't mind them pushing a story, but it just, as you said, disconnected from the story at hand.
Yeah, it's odd. I don't really know what to make of it because I don't hate it. I just don't really feel like it's consequential.
No.
I tell you what, though, there is one thing about this story that I did like, and that was the Master. Now, whilst we didn't get like a massively impressive arc ending or anything, I actually really like the Master in this episode because, I mean, okay, it's kind of complicated because there's things that the Master is involved in that I have issues with, but firstly, same with Spyfall, really like Sacha Dhawan's performance. I know that some people weren't too keen on it. Like, I know Callum wasn't keen on it because he found him to be a bit like, he described it as like a teenager trying to be the Joker, and I can see what he means. But I do enjoy this version of the Master quite a bit. I thought Dhawan's performance was really strong. I really liked the way he taunts the Doctor and how... I mean, again, the logical steps are a bit odd as well, because it's like, how did the Master know the Timeless Child was the Doctor if the information was hidden? And then you could come up with the theories of, well, maybe he's lying, maybe he... I don't know. And that you'd have to explain it later. But again, like, it's just... That, again, comes to the issue of, well, that means you have to rely on a future story for this to be justified. It's just very... It's a bit weird. Then there's the whole thing of Ashad, which we'll get to soon, but he's related into that part of it. But I do really like Dhawan's performance. I do think that he has the most fire out of any character in the story. He brings me to be interested in what's happening because of how interesting his character is, despite the fact that the story doesn't do that much with his plot. And I do genuinely like how, that moment of when he's confronted with the Doctor about to almost homicide Gallifrey and saying, look where I've brought you. That's very reminiscent of other Master moments, but obviously parts of the plot we'll get to with other characters. But I do enjoy the Master overall. I do enjoy him. I think he was probably the highlight for me of this episode.
Yeah, what the Master was doing in the plot, I wasn't so big on, but Sacha Dhawan's performance, where he's like a rabid dog, he's like frothing at the mouth with how much rage he has inside of him. I really liked his performance for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I really like how he brings a different side out of the 13th Doctor as well. A much more unhinged side, a much more triggered side, which is what Jodie needed. But again, it's all... This story has so many like bits and pieces that I really like, but they don't really form a shape at all. They're all kind of clustered. Which is really... which is interesting because that's quite reminiscent of quite a few Moffat finales.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm pretty much in full agreement. A lot of the characters' actions in the story just don't feel like anything, but the performances are really strong. And like when Jodie tackled the Master, that was such a great thing to see that side of the Doctor, to see that fire is still there, and the fact that it was the Master that brought it out. I loved. Yeah, there's so many little tidbits I quite like here. It's just, again, like I said, they don't really form a overall story. They're just sort of a bunch of really interesting set pieces smashed together. And it's a bit frustrating, really. It's like, come on, Chibney, you can do better than this. Surely. Yeah.
It's odd, very odd.
Sure.
Of course, then we also had... Okay, I think the next one we're about to talk about is probably my biggest disappointment with this episode, and that's the Lone Cyberman. Because... Okay, so he was great in The Haunting of Villa Diodati.
Yes.
Then in Ascension of the Cybermen, he got stripped back and became a bit of a like glorified Tim Shaw in a Cyberman suit, and it was a bit disappointing. And then here, he's kind of just deleted from the story.
Yeah, he's just gone.
Like his only purpose in this whole finale episode is to set up how the plot will end. And then once he does that, he disappears and is never seen again. And we never find out where he came from, who he was, why he was here. We never find out, like, the most interesting things you could have said about him. He was just some guy. And that is very disappointing from Chibnall, I think.
It's again, I'm in full agreement. It was just it was such a good setup for a character, and as you said, in Haunting of Villadate, it was amazing, but then he was just sort of diminishing returns, and then in this episode, he was just kind of pushed aside for the Master with no real resistance, with no real oomph, with no real resolution for his story. Because he didn't get one. He just was, as I said, pushed to the side. He was just out of it, which is a shame because he was such an interesting concept and a really interesting antagonist to begin with, and I was really enjoying him and hoping that in this episode he would get a whole bunch to do and would be like another Master, Rassilon, Rani, you know, one of those iconic antagonists to the Doctor, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen because he was just dispatched like that. No real confrontation with the Doctor. It was just gone.
Yeah, basically.
It's a shame.
And there's not really much more to say, to be honest.
Nah, I agree.
Let's move on to the Cybermen, though. And I think there was something I mentioned in the Ascension review that I wanted to mention here. There is something that happens in this episode that I think should have happened at the cliffhanger of Ascension of the Cybermen. And that is the Cyber Time Lords. And the reason why is because the Cyber Time Lords is such an interesting idea. It's so... I mean, it is kind of fan service. Like, it's something that, like, comes from fucking, like, fan fiction, and the design looks like it's from DeviantArt. But it is a very interesting concept of, well, what if the Time Lords were Cybermen? Really interesting. But they don't really do anything with them after that. And that's the problem I have, is I wish that if the reveal had come at the end of the first part, and then in the second part we actually got to see what would happen if there were Cyber Time Lords and seeing how they would work as an army. I mean, I know that's a very blockbuster point of view to have, but fuck it, I don't care. I want to see it. I want to see what Cyber Time Lords are like. Don't tease it for me and then take it away straight away. Why would you do that? Why would you present it on a silver platter and then not give it to me? It's just not fair. It's just not fair. There's nothing going to the story. It has so many brilliant ideas that it doesn't surface. It's so frustrating. It's like, God, you could have done something so brilliant. This could have been a great episode.
Because imagine this, right? If there was like, instead of just having about 6 survivors, there was a whole city, like a stronghold of people left that we got to learn about in the first episode. And then, in the second episode, the Cybermasters were sent out and just completely eviscerated them within a matter of minutes. They were like, aha, here's a threat. The Doctor has to fight back against the Master, prevent this from spreading universe-wide. It's big, it's bombastic, it gives the Doctor something to do beyond just going, hey, Master, stop. And... you know, yeah, you're completely right. It does feel like wasted potential.
You know what you should have done?
Cool idea.
You know what would have been way better? You know what would have been way better? Okay. So the Cyber Time Lord reveal is the cliffhanger to part 1. All of the stuff that we get revealed about the Timeless Child happens in part 1 as well. And the Brendan scenes from Ascension of the Cybermen are sprinkled throughout the series.
Yes.
And then in the finale, coming off the part 1 cliffhanger, the Doctor finds out that the Timeless Child is her. There's Cyber Time Lords. And everything's going to break loose on Gallifrey. And then do something with it. Do something with it. Don't fuck around with a slideshow and tease something that you're not going to give us. Do something with the story. Develop the characters. Make us care. Make us, heartbroken when Koshama self-sacrifices. Don't just... oh, fuck. It's frustrating because, again, like I said, this could have been amazing. This could have been a great story if Chibnall knew what he was doing with all these parts he creates. But he doesn't. He just... he never follows through. He's such a blunted writer. Like, okay.
Because
when people play sport, one of the things that you're always taught, and it applies to so many things. It applies to baseball, it applies to golf, it applies to boxing. you have to follow through with your strikes. If you don't follow through, you will not achieve your full impact or your full potential. It feels like Chibnall is all backswing, no follow through.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating because it could have been amazing.
He comes up with so many good ideas and then just doesn't push them far enough or use them in an interesting way. And yeah, it's really a shame because as we've been saying, this episode felt quite hollow, and the Cybermasters show up, are set dressing, and then they get blown up, and it just, I hate to do this again, but compare it to the Doctor Falls. There was a ticking time bomb because the Cybermen were at the other end of the ship, slowly evolving, making their way up to the other end because of the time dilation, and that was a cool ass concept. Whilst the Doctor is stuck there with Bill as a Cyberman with two masters, and everything was coming to a head. It was like a freight train that just wasn't going to stop, and the Doctor really had to think on his feet and do something, which it pushed him to his limit. Yes, it wasn't his regeneration story technically, but it is what pushed him to the end, which then kickstarted his regeneration, which he postponed, and then Twice Upon a Time happened. But there was stakes there. There was this constant momentum moving forward, and this forward wave of tension and drama, whereas in this one it was just all very sit down and watch this slideshow presentation of Doctor Who lore, which is interesting but doesn't make for a very exciting episode.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so much potential.
Tell you what, I'm just bloody glad Moffat stuck the landing in his final finale.
Yeah. Oh boy.
It was.
That was
so nice.
I think the reason why Series 10 clicks with us is because it feels like Moffat doing something that's very in the vein of a Russell T Davies series. And I think that's what it makes Series 10 feel a bit different from the others that he did.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, this episode's so frustrating. It's not like I don't hate it or anything. I don't have like a filth or like an anger or a bitter vile towards it like I do with like Hellbent, Wedding of River Song, Death in Heaven, or even the Series 11 finale. But I'm just let down by how much potential it had. If that makes sense.
No, I completely agree. I just sort of, once it finished, I just sort of felt like this was their scenes cut. It didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel like an adventure. It didn't feel like anything. It just felt like a wiki page. An interesting wiki page, I'll give it that, but just a wiki page.
I mean, when Chibnall said he was going to make Doctor Who more educational again, I didn't realise it was going to be this far. The thing is, though, I don't want to come off as one of those pricks that talks like this, but we don't watch Doctor Who to be in history class. We watch Doctor Who to be in, like, PE class, you know? we want to see things happen. Or we want a story to take place. We want a plot to happen. We want characters. We want stakes. We want development. We want heartbreak. We want concepts. And there's there's bits and pieces all throughout the story that are like that have those elements in them, but they're not followed through. He doesn't follow fucking through with his stories. It's frustrating. It's so frustrating. It's Doctor Who on blue balls. It's does my head in. I remember after I finished watching this episode, I had to sit on my couch for about 3 hours just trying to digest what I'd seen. I was like, I have no idea what to think about this. It really befuddled me. It's very strange. Okay, so there was something I mentioned in the Can You Hear Me review, and I'd actually seen this episode by that point, and you hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to see what your take is on it first before I make a comment. What are your thoughts? Because there's not really much to say about the companions as individual characters. Okay, well, let's just get Ryan out the way. He shot a hoop. His dyspraxia is done. Great.
Yep.
Moving on.
The scene was vaguely set up in
It was set up in Spyfall Part 1, and then Haunting helped a little bit because he mentioned subtly about his dyspraxia with the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And then he shot a hoop here. Hooray. Anyway, what did you think of the scene with Yaz and Graham?
It was beautifully shot, the acting was great, and the sentiment was lovely, but felt unearned. I never really got a connection between Graham and Yaz before this, and this doesn't feel like a moment of maturity where their relationship develops. It just sort of feels like Graham going, "You're really great, Yaz," without ever seeing stuff that motivates it beyond it just being what's needed in the script for him to say to her.
Well, yeah, that entire scene for me, because at the time I watched it, I had Can You Hear Me on my mind, and in the context of just Can You Hear Me, I think that scene works, but apart from that, it doesn't. And this is another problem with Chibnall, is the fact that if that scene had come at the tail end of a great story, it could have really worked for a lot of people, I think. Because it's a great set piece. That scene between Yaz and Graham is a great set piece, but it doesn't feel earned because the story doesn't set it up properly, aside from Can You Hear Me. That's the only one that sets it up in terms of Yaz's character, but that doesn't mean that it's relative to how Graham feels about her. We barely even see any screen time between them at all in Series 11 or 12. It's very unearned. And it's sad, because when I watched it, I was like, this is such a well-acted, well-scored, and well-shot scene, and in terms of Yaz's depression, it really works for a character. But we don't know that. We don't know why Graham is saying that, because it's never shown to us on screen beforehand.
Yeah, you're right. If it had come at the end of Can You Hear Me, when instead of Graham awkwardly talking to the doctor and her sort of rejecting his, just not sort of unsure of how to process it, if it was Graham talking to Yaz and they had this shared thing of Graham's fear of dying and losing the battle to cancer, and then Yaz's depression, and they had a connection there, and then they built on that in this, it could have flown much nicer, but it just didn't ring true to me, unfortunately.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about the companions in this episode, because they were just there.
The one thing I did like, though, and I suppose it's more on the direction, though, is I really liked how the scene was shot when they were hiding inside the Cybermen shells. That was great.
Oh, yeah, no, that was all great, but that's, direction stuff.
Yeah. I know we've already brought up Kushamas, but basically, underdeveloped character. Great actor, but underdeveloped character. He suffers that Chibnall.
Yeah.
He suffers that Chibnall issue, I think. Doesn't he?
I agree. He's got a great presence on screen because of who's playing him, but I just never, again, when he comes back and he self-sacrifices, I didn't go, oh yes, what a powerful moment for this character. Oh yes, it's interesting. It just sort of happened and I didn't feel anything for it.
Yeah, it's sad because, again, that whole climax with the Doctor and the Master and the Cyber Time Lords and Kushamas is a really, really good set piece. In terms of the direction, the music, the score, the acting, and where it could fit into a story, I really liked the set piece in terms of how it was executed. But like we said with so many things, it wasn't earned, and it didn't have an impact because we didn't care about the character.
Yeah.
And this is the man who wrote Broadchurch. This is the man who wrote Broadchurch.
I don't know, man. I guess he's just not great at writing people that aren't real, you know?
Well, I mean, the companions are written like real people, but they don't...
Mm-hmm.
It's just a bunch of moments that could have been great that aren't. That's all it is.
I agree. I fully agree.
Kind of just speechless, really. I mean, not just because of my anxiety attack I've had today, but I'm just... I don't really know what to say.
I'm sorry I can't contribute more, but I can't think of more to say about this character. I just... got nothing.
Barristan got more in one episode than he did.
That's true.
The side characters, I can't remember what happens to Ravia. Does she die or not? I can't remember.
I don't know. I'm sorry, people. I know we're supposed to be better than this, but I can't remember. I haven't rewatched it.
No idea. And then the Jadoon turned up at the end, and they sent the Doctor to Sharda, and that was interesting. I was like, "What the hell, Sharda?"
That's great. I like that. But it just But again, I feel like I only liked it because it reminded me of Titanic crashing into the Doctor, Donna appearing in the TARDIS, you know, etc., etc.
Well, I mean, she literally said, "What? What?"
Exactly. It was kind of that sort of big, out of nowhere ending where the Doctor's lost and confused, and I really like that.
Also, there's a TARDIS on Earth that's a house.
That's a great little thing. I like the fact that it was a house.
Yeah, and another thing as well is, like, it's very odd how she just sort of... her reaction to it all when she gets back to the TARDIS is very mild. And I feel like that kind of sums up how we feel about the story. It's like, I wish I cared more. I wish I cared more about something so interesting and so important. The fact that this is a story where the Master reinvents the Time Lords to be Cybermen, reveals the Doctor is not what we thought she was. She has so many lives before Hartnell and is so important to Gallifreyan Roar, the first person to regenerate. A companion says to another that they're even greater than the Doctor. All set pieces that sound really interesting and on paper sound like a monumental episode. And then I got to the end of it and I was like, I don't really feel anything. Somehow Chris Chibnall has the talent to take something that sounds like it's the most interesting ever and make it indifferent.
I guess because we've seen a lot of this kind of stuff before as well, it didn't feel as impactful as it could to new viewers who've only come on the show recently. But even then, I just can't see how it would be exciting. It's not big. It's like the only really sort of vaguely exciting scene is when the Doctor gives the Matrix a blast of all her memories, and we get that rendition of the theme, and we see all the known Doctors and then all these monsters and stuff.
The Absorbeloff was in it.
The Absorbeloff was in it, yeah. Good old Peter Kay. And that's it.
Oh yeah, and it confirmed the brain of Morbius as well.
Yes. It's such a weird deep cut, but hey, at least, you know, he is. I respect that he is trying to do something big, but it just sort of fell flat on its face for me.
This means that Robert Holmes, Philip Hinchcliffe, Graham Harper, Douglas Camfield, and Terrence Dix were all doctors. That's very weird.
Yeah, man. People have been saying that the Curse of the Fatal Death Doctor is real as well.
People are saying that their fan-made doctors are real. I just saw a live stream of Who Addicts watching Rose, because there was like a simulcast watch of Rose around the world today, and they're saying like, what if Clive is the timeless child?
It could be.
I mean, there's no doubt this opens up avenues. It absolutely opens up avenues to some very interesting stories, but the actual story that it's in isn't interesting.
Yeah, that sums it up to a T, man. A lot of interesting ideas going forward, but for the episode itself, it was just very lackluster for me.
There's not much more I can say about the characters, honestly. Or the plot.
No, I'm done with the characters and the plot.
I suppose I'll ask you your final thoughts. What do you think of the organic bomb thing?
Doomsday weapons are a dime a dozen in Doctor Who. When they show up, I'm just like, okay, sure, there's a Doomsday weapon, whatever.
Like the reality bomb.
Exactly.
Though the difference is, the reality bomb in the context of the story makes sense as to why Davros would use it. Whereas this is just...
Because he just wants to... Yeah.
Because it's explained, I mean, obviously explained in some very weird, timey-wimey, technobabbly words. But if you pay close attention, there is an explanation as to why Davros is doing the insane thing he's doing. But with this, I mean, I don't hate it or anything, but it just seems like Chibnall needed something to end the plot with, and that's how he did it.
Yeah, it just sort of said, okay, ticking time bomb stakes without it feeling big.
Yeah, and it's really weird because there's a scene in this episode where the Doctor almost lets herself die forever, and yet yet it's not that memorable. That's the weird thing. And I think it's probably because it's just so predictable that it wasn't going to be the Doctor.
Yeah, I'm sort of stumbling for words, but it's really sort of, this whole episode kind of took the wind out of my sails. I just didn't care for the finale, which is such a shame because as we keep saying, so many interesting.
It's weird because you're as
so
speechless
creative,
as I am, and you haven't had an anxiety attack today.
No, that's true. I'm just dumbfounded.
Yeah.
Gobsmacked.
Yeah.
But that's them's the blows.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say this might be the weirdest finale we've ever had.
For sure. And I respect it in a way for that. It's just a shame it's not weird in a good way.
I suppose...
Oh,
sorry, what was that?
It takes you away.
Well, Takes You Away is not... Takes You Away is not a finale, though.
Exactly, but in terms of tone, I'm just sort of disappointed that it's weird that we can't really get a handle on it, as opposed to it's weird because it's just a whole bunch of weird whack ideas being thrown at the screen. It's just kind of lore expanding stuff that just sort of was just visual noise to me.
Yeah. Because there's other finales that are kind of weird. Like the Name of the Doctor is quite a weird finale, but at least it has some stuff to it. There is actually parts of it that are a story. Like the Trenzalore plot with the Doctor's grave and the War Doctor. And that stuff actually has consequences on the next two stories. Whereas I'm a little bit hesitant with this because it feels like Chibnall's going to drag this out over multiple seasons. And I don't really know where he can go with it to have it make any impact. I don't know. It's very strange.
I guess the thing is it could turn out to be that the Master was wrong or he was lying, and then the 60th anniversary reveals all this, and it's like.
It's funny because in the Fugitive of the Jadoon in review, I said Chibnall, and obviously this is quite an infamous moment, but I said that Chibnall could pull a J.J. Abrams, and then I watched the finale. I'm like, no, he really could pull a J.J. Abrams if he wanted to. Like, there's an opening here for him to completely retcon this as an entire lie, or just something different.
Yeah.
He set this up for himself. I'm like, wow, he actually really could do a J.J. Abrams if he actually wanted to. So I suppose we'll have to wait and find out. But again, it's like, is it really worth, spending all this time faffing around with this story and dragging it out over multiple seasons when you could just do it here and now and then do something else later? Or is he dead set on having his idea? Because it's like I would understand you spanning a story across multiple seasons if you've got content in between that you're going to fill it up with, and therefore you don't have enough room to tell it in one season. You want it to be long form. The problem is he's doing it over long form, but not filling up the content in between. He's not giving us anything that interesting here and now, in the moment, in the episode, in the series itself, rather than just teasing something that we're going to get later, which is something that Moffat did quite a bit with. You think about like the Silence arc, and that never really surfaced at all.
Yeah.
You think about the Hybrid, it's just, it's been done before and it's been done badly, so I don't trust it. I don't trust this arc that Chibnall has going. I mean, he might pull it off, I don't know, but it's strange. I don't want to be. I don't want to get to an end of a series and not feel like I've had something completed. You know, it feels so open ended. The entire thing feels so open ended, and it's a bit bizarre.
Yeah. I think a large part of that comes down to the characters. Ryan and Graham's story haven't been sort of done already, and Yaz just kind of not really having an arc so much as we just learn more about her through this season.
Pretty much.
And that's really what I've got to say about the season.
Mm-hmm. However, let's move on from Chris Chibnall, because now I want to get on to the two things that I absolutely love about this episode. Firstly, the direction by Jamie Magnus Stone. It was gorgeous. Some of the best looking Doctor Who we've ever seen. Gallifrey was gorgeous. The flashback scenes were gorgeous. The entire thing. I mean, the green screen bit in The Matrix was a little bit iffy, but all the stuff on Gallifrey, all the stuff in the flashbacks, every scene in terms of the way it was blocked, the way it was shot, the intensity of it, brilliant. I loved the direction of this. I thought it was deliciously beautiful.
For sure. It looked great. No question.
And like I said before, the Cyberman scene where they're hiding inside the shells, I loved that bit.
Yeah, that was fantastic. That was a really strong bit.
And I love the scale of Gallifrey too. It looked very big. Very big. I loved that.
Yeah, there was a certain grandeur to some of the cinematography. It's just a shame that the writing
and the color grading. The color grading of this episode is so vibrant. It was so orange and blue, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, the blues were really blue and the oranges were really orange, which made for a lovely contrast.
I just loved that. It was great. And the other part that I loved was Sagan Akinola's music. Some of his best tracks were in this. There were multiple times, I think, in the reaction. It's been a while since I did it, but there's multiple times in the reactions where I noticed this music. I was like, oh my god, that's just, it's amazing. I can't wait for the soundtrack to come out. But some of the music in this, I mean, obviously some people criticize when the Doctor Who theme played, thought it was a bit too on the nose, and I can understand that. But apart from that one little thing, I thought his score was it was delightful. It was so good.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. And even with the Doctor Who theme being on the nose, it was still a beautiful, sort of intense, driving rendition of the theme that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and again, this is one of the frustrating things about this episode, is because on the production level and on the acting level, it was all superb. Like the actors, the director, the music, and all of the color grading and all that. And all of that on like a stylistic point of view was all brilliant. Like they were at full speed. You know, this was, I think, one of the most beautiful episodes of Doctor Who we've ever had. It had some great music. It had some fantastic acting. It's just unfortunately the story didn't hit it, and that's the problem.
Yeah, man.
And
it was the script.
Because oh my god, if this was a good story, this could have been an all-time classic, considering how well it was made.
For sure.
That's bloody frustrating. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say about the music, to be honest.
Nor do I. Because as we said, the new Cyberman theme is good. I like the new Cyberman theme.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was good, yeah. Viewership, 3.7 overnight. I think this was... I think this might have been the lowest we've had for a finale. Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I think it
wouldn't
is.
know.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the Battle of Ransgrove Colossus was like 4 million or something. So yeah,
Okay.
so nothing overly impressive, but it wasn't terrible. It was just sort of the viewership seems to coast along with the ratings that the other series get. Like, it seems like Chibnall's episodes don't really have any specific hype around them. It's more so they all sort of consistent in terms of the attraction, if that makes sense. Which is interesting.
It doesn't really draw. It doesn't really draw new people
Yeah,
in. When
I think there's something to be said about that, considering that we knew that the finale was going to have the Master and the Cybermen in it. I think the problem is that people don't see that as the draw. What it is it's whether you like it or not, it's basically Chibnall's product feels like a single entity, and whether you like that or not is why you'll watch.
Yeah, because I think there are some people who, if there's a finale on and it's being advertised, they'll click on and be like, "Okay, I'll watch this because it's a big, fun thing. I'll see what's going on." But if you don't really like the product at all, then you're not going to be drawn to it. And it's
Yeah, because it feels. I think with especially the Russell T Davies era, but even parts of the Moffat as well. Early on, I feel like, and that might just be the way TV's evolved, but every time there was like a returning villain, the viewership would spike. Like, it would get really high. Whereas I feel like nowadays it's a bit more like, it's not about who's going to be in the episode. It's more about like, do I like this series? Do I like this showrunner? Do I like this doctor? And it's more of like, is this series consistent enough for me to tune in? Which I think is something that you get in an age of streaming. And to me, that is a sign that I think the format needs to be changed to a more serialized. I think
so too.
I think we need to have longer, and this is something that Lord Star's been going on about, and I think he's right in the sense that now that we're in a streaming age, I think we need to have longer stories.
For sure, because there's this whole binge culture. So when a series comes out, like if we have, the first episode be a two-parter, then there's another two-parter, and then the rest is, one off in the middle, and then it's 5 episodes run to the end. You could do some really interesting serialized stories with that. I think you're right. It is time to freshen it up and regenerate the show, for lack of a better term, and give it this new overhaul to give it a different kind of momentum going forward.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you don't want to take away that whole tradition of a different location every few episodes. That's fine.
But you need have stories that allow that to happen.
Yeah, but I think
it just depends on what you write.
Yeah, I think it's evident that these self-contained stories that are hyped behind one particular thing isn't going to garner as much interest as it used to, because TV's changed. So you're probably better off having longer stories that people will binge, that you can develop further on.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean every story has to be lots of parts. I'm not saying that. You can have a 45-minute episode every now and then, like a minimalist one, like a Midnight or a Turn Left or a Blink. That's fine. But I think you need to put in perspective that viewing habits are different these days, and you need to sacrifice stuff like Orphan 55, which doesn't need to exist. You can extend something else to 2 parts and make it more focused.
And more powerful, for sure.
Yeah.
I agree. I keep saying that, but it's true. I agree.
Yep. Anyway. Give your conclusion and a rating out of 10 for The Timeless Children.
Really interesting ideas throughout the whole thing, but kept being stopped by certain, bumps in the road, which just sort of, with the writing of it, I just couldn't get invested in it. I just sort of felt very patchy and disconnected from what I was watching. It just didn't really do anything for me, despite what was being done in the story itself. that being said, production value is amazing, performances amazing, music amazing, editing amazing. It's all really good. It's just the story didn't really click with me, so I'm just going to give it a 6 out of 10.
All right then. I'm very much the same. I thought it had some really neat ideas, and I thought some of the execution was fantastic, like with the acting, the direction, the music, and the color grading. That was excellent. And this had some really good potential. There were some really nice set pieces that could have worked in an overall story, but they don't because it's not really an overall story. And something that's meant to be so important and so groundbreaking fell a bit flat for me, so I'm also going to give it a 6 out of 10. Which 6 isn't a bad score, but it's a bit disappointing for a finale, I'd say.
Exactly. Yeah, 6 isn't bad. It's not a negative score. It's just that it's just doesn't do much for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a bit disappointing.
Which is a shame.
So, now that I just feel deflated now, because I'm like, this is a fucking finale we're talking about. We should be like having a massively electric review, you know? It's sad because when we started, it was after Series 10 ended. Imagine if we'd reviewed Series 10 when it aired and we could have talked about the Dr. Falls when it came out.
Oh, man. That would have been art. That would have been just so much fun.
Yeah, because I loved that episode and I still do. Very small nitpicks I have with it, but I still love it. It's... yeah.
It's still so captivating.
It is. Especially compared to this. Well, the next time we have an episode, it's called Revolution of the Daleks. I don't know when it airs. Probably Christmas or something like that. I don't know. Maybe New Year's.
Yeah, it's just holidays, so they haven't been specific with it.
Yeah. But obviously that's not going to be for a while, so the next videos we'll be doing a Series 12 recap and rankings of all the episodes, like we usually do. And then after that, we will re-rank all of the series of Modern Who with Series 12 updated into it. And that's going to be a very interesting video, because I've watched a lot of Modern Who over since we did that ranking. I've re-watched almost all of it with a fresh eye, and quite a bit's changed, I have to say. So that's going to be an interesting video.
That's interesting.
It's a very interesting video.
Yeah.
And yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where we think Series 12 ranks. So you guys have got those two to look forward to. And then after that, hopefully, if coronavirus doesn't delay my DVD order anymore, we shall have the Faceless Ones in hand for when the isolation eventually ends. Hopefully it ends. And after that comes, you've got Worst of Classic Who, and eventually later in the year at some point Fury from the Deep will come out as well, which, looking forward to that. Yeah, so join us for those two other Series 12 videos, and yeah, that's all I got to say. Anything else you want to say?
No, stay safe, stay clean. We'll see you when we see you.